Hello, this is 187. I thought I'd just do a little intro because I've been trying to get this episode out for a couple of months out now, and what I wanted to do is to make it a longer episode and perhaps have somebody with a lived experience of childhood sexual trauma, but the person in question was really not in a state of mind really to be able to do that. And so I've sat on this episode for a fair bit, even though I perhaps shouldn't have. And then, of course, Russell Brand happened. So what kind of infuriated me about this, because I've known for a while, because I know a few comedians, and they have pointed out that there is a WhatsApp group where it names all the lecturers, promoters, club owners, and other comedians that are, as far as we can say, that don't seem to accept consent, right? And they feel they have an indelible right to touch, or actually feel that they have the actual right to not think that consent applies to them. And I say that loosely, obviously without prejudice and all of that. However, with all of the things that are happening regarding Russell Brand, just makes me think yet another person that is identified as a predator, and I would say that he's exactly the same as that this is exactly the same thing as the whole Andrew Tate debacle, definitely the same as other prominent people or people that are well known that have issues or disrespect for women in general. But what I'd like to point out, we are talking about people who are sexually abusive and abusers of all genders, abusing people of all genders, and it's not acceptable. We have to make a promise to ourselves that when we hear something that's occurring, that we talk about it, or we shout about it, and if we know somebody's affected by it, we listen and support them. And that's the main thing, especially if you are a professional, especially if you are a social worker, a support worker, police officer, basically anyone, just anyone, any frontline worker. Really, you need to speak out about this. And I know sometimes it can be difficult because the people in question hold power and so on, but we'll never see an end to this ever unless we do something about it. And certainly we need to make these offences, rather than walking around calling people nonces and rapists and so on, we need to make sure that they are held fully accountable, and that people who are victims feel confident enough to report, and those who are reporting are taken seriously and not scapegoated because somebody happens to be a well-known politician or quite famous or has got lots of money. If you are a sexual predator, you need to be taken to the book, as far as I'm concerned, and it doesn't matter how famous you are, it doesn't matter what gender you are, you need to pay the piper. End of story. Right, so I'm going to let this episode go on. What you might want to do is, I have made an episode on consent. I've also made an episode on male perpetrators of domestic abuse, and we all know that domestic abuse also can entail elements of sexual assaults or sexual misconduct or sexual disrespect, whatever you want to call it. So have a listen to those as well. If you have any questions or something comes up for you, then look at the show notes and I'll make sure that there is a line for you to ring. But if you are a victim of sexual abuse, then feel free to get in touch. If you want to tell your story, that's great. If you just want to shout out about it, we can get somebody else to read out your experience, your lived experience, and then we can air that, or I can just show you someone you can speak to. Other than that, you take care. You're a lovely human being, and hope this episode is helpful. Hello, you beautiful human. This is the 187 Said podcast, and I'm 187. The 187 Said podcast is a podcast for men, those who identify as men, and those that care for them. I'm producing this podcast to normalise the conversation around many of the topics that have an impact on men. If you're finding the episodes helpful, then feel free to support me by sharing the podcast, talking about the subject, or even getting in contact with me and letting me know what subjects I should cover. But also, if you have a lived experience that you think is important to talk about, or something you'd like to share, all of my contact details are in the show notes. Okay, welcome to another episode of the 187 Said podcast. We have a very esteemed guest, really, to be honest with you. I'm quite stoked of having this gentleman with me today. What I'd like you to do is to listen to his story, the lived experience, and if you or somebody you know that can benefit from his journey, then hold them and help them, or if you need anything, say something, because the support is out there for you. So rather than being specific about who I'm speaking to, would you like to introduce yourself and tell me what you do?
Fantastic. Hi, everybody. My name is Jeremy Indica. I raise awareness for child sexual abuse online. I create content around the topic, and my aim with it all is to catch the attention of not only people who are usually involved in these discussions and circles, but people who are not so much. So they would have heard, obviously, that the crime of children being abused is happening, but it's never really in their sphere of what they look at online or what the conversations that they have. And I'm really trying to turn that on its head. So I'm trying to make content that is engaging on a subject that usually is too uncomfortable to look at.
Okay, that's perfect. And so what is it that brought you to this point where you felt that this was something that you need to campaign for?
In 2019, I had already been on a journey for some years of speaking about my own experience of abuse in childhood, sexual abuse in childhood. And I just got so interested in what the hell was going on out there with other people. How were other people doing? Were they suffering? How were they dealing with their story? Because I'd only really dealt with my own story by this point. And I just found websites, Facebook groups, Instagram pages, like thousands upon thousands of people sharing their pain, their discomfort, and the unfortunate thing that had happened to them in their childhood. I literally couldn't believe it. So many people out there. And that's when I decided, well, I felt at that point like I'd had a fortunate journey. The memories came back to me when I was 25 years old. I started speaking out to close friends when I was 27 years old. I had people that I could trust to tell in the first place. They gave me great responses. They listened to me. They gave me space to talk. They respected what I was saying. And so by this point, I was 32 years old. So I've been dealing with my history for 5 years. And I thought, well, I should try and do something with this. You know, this journey that I've had, I should try and do something with it. And what would that be? That was to take it public. And I started doing that online. And one thing led to another. And I started making different types of content for YouTube, content for Instagram. I've just launched a podcast, etc., etc. And that has now led me to run all of these platforms and all of this work online.
Right. So, and it's interesting that this is, you said that it's almost something you take a positive from that's flowered this creativity within you to to sing your message to people to hear in different platforms.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that you were saying that this is a childhood experience, but the switch turned on at 25.
Right.
What was it that turned the switch? What was happening sort of at 23, 24 for this to happen?
So the sexual abuse that I went through finished when I was 10 years old. Now, all the years after that, I'd never actually forgotten about what had happened. Something would come up on the news that would remind me of it. Something would come up in conversation that would remind me of it. But honestly, my life was going great. I really didn't care about it. So it wasn't like I was thinking about it all the time. Maybe just occasionally I'd think about it, very occasionally. But the feeling would come and it would pass straight away. I had great friends, great career, everything was going well. But at 25, things started to change. It was like the memories took a different form. I couldn't let go of them. I couldn't seem to settle with them. They were causing me a lot of discomfort. They were causing me a lot of pain. And I believe there could be a number of reasons why that happened at 25, but I could assume that a couple of them are this. I got to a stage in my life, in my brain development, let's say, where I was ready to start looking at what happened in my childhood. And I also believe that in combination with that, I was actually working in Dubai. I was flying to Dubai once a month because my job was an aircraft design engineer. And we had some aircraft out there that we were doing some modifications on, and I was running those. So once a month, I'd fly to Dubai for a week at a time. And I believe that I saw somebody that looked like him. And the same skin tone, the same kind of beard, same glasses. And I think that was also a trigger. And I think it's this combination of all of these things, brain development, stage of life, and this moment where I believe I saw somebody that looked like him, that had just blew up these flashbacks in my head.
Yeah. So, and triggering, in your experience when you spoke to other people, is this quite a usual thing to happen, where you could either not ignore it, but be able to go through life, as best as you can, and then something just triggers it?
So now that I've been in these circles for some years, this is my 5th year of doing this project now, I see that as such a common experience. People have this tragic abuse experience in their childhood, and they continue their life, showing no signs, never telling anybody. And it's not until they enter adulthood, and when we say adulthood, let's say 25 onwards, right? I hear something about that your brain is fully developed at 25, right? So it's only then that people start to reflect on what happened to them and start to think about saying something. A lot of people I've seen have reported it's actually when they have children themselves also. And they start looking at their children and thinking, oh my goodness, what happened to me was so terrible. And that invokes the flashbacks also. I heard something that was so interesting to me, that when something so horrific happens to you when you're a child, you've got no capability at that time to process what's happened and work through it. So what your brain cleverly does is it boxes it up, locks the box, puts that box to the back of your mind, and keeps it there until you are at a stage in your life where you can start looking at that. And then your brain will bring the box back to the front of your mind and start releasing some of those memories. This is so common. I mean, some of the numbers that I hear, it's like 25 or 30 years on average before somebody speaks about an experience of sexual abuse in their childhood. I think for men, it's often mid-30s that they speak, if ever.
Wow. So all of this time sort of holding this, the box opens up, this memory comes out, some trigger, and then having to contextualize and you're like rebuild those memories and then communicate that to someone.
Okay.
Right. So how does somebody over this period of time then decides I'm now going to communicate that? There's going to be, I mean, I can just see so many barriers.
Right. There's so many barriers. And one of the first ones I'm going to say for myself in my experience was, how do you even talk about it? You know, how do you even put that into sentences? Because when you start accepting that was part of your life, the first things I was asking myself was, I cannot believe that happened. Like, I just cannot believe that actually happened. Like, it's so tragic. It's so tragic that the occurrence of an adult exploiting a child for their body to satisfy their own perversive sexual fantasies. It's so tragic. And for you to actually be the victim of that situation, I mean, honestly, I was like having to check myself, being like, did that really happen? Because that is like, you know, I think we'll all agree as a society is one of the most horrendous things that happens today. And for you to know that you were in the middle of one of those situations, I mean, that takes years to even process that part of the situation. And then to start thinking about how to verbalize it, who to tell. It's like constant barriers. It's constant barriers. But very interestingly, for anybody that's listening, in my experience and now the experience that I'm seeing in others, as I share stories on the platform that I've created called Something to Say, which is a space for others to share their story if they wish to do so. As they submit their story and we talk with them on the release date of their story, a lot of people do say the same thing. The minute it's actually out, all of that pressure and those barriers seem to dissolve instantly. And it's actually really interesting. It's like the minute you say those words out loud, it's like all of that fear and anxiety take a step down.
So it's almost like taking the cap off the pressure cooker. It's in my brain. I go through this kind of like this process. Well, what this happened is illegal. You need to go to the police immediately. Talking it out to, I suppose, out into the open. There's no active journey to someone paying for it. It's the individual coming to terms with that. They'll have a different motivation.
And I'm going to say that the reason for people sharing their situation is going to be, you know, there's going to be a multitude of reasons for that. Maybe it's because they just want to get it off their chest and that's enough. Maybe they want to let their family know. Maybe it's because they want to go down the prosecution route because the person that did this has got children themselves and has access to other children and potentially is still doing this. It's so complicated, but I would say that speaking out about it for the first time is a completely different, complicated situation to reporting it and going through the prosecution. They are two completely different entities, both complicated in their own right, and they're interlinked. And that creates a full picture of the complications of coming to terms with an experience like this.
So, and like you say, if they're both completely separate, it seems to me for the individual to empower themselves, they have to find their space to share what's happened to them. It doesn't have to be the judicial until they're ready. I
think it's a journey just to process it. You know, I think it's just a journey to process any horrific thing that happened in your childhood. I mean, we haven't got to just talk about sexual abuse. Maybe it was like bullying at school. Maybe it was an insecurity that you had. Maybe it was the way somebody treated you. It's like all of these things. I feel like when you're an adult and you start looking back and thinking, oh my God, that actually happened, it's going to take a while to actually process and accept and understand and come to terms with that part of your history.
And so, from what you were saying, you now have a platform where people who have that lived experience can share on I suppose within their on their own terms.
Yes.
Could you tell me a bit more about that?
So as I continued doing this work and evolving my platforms, social media platforms in particular, I just looked back over the years and realized how much confidence I got through sharing my story with the situation that happened. It kind of turned it on its head because I spoke to the first person when I was 27, close friend. Then maybe 6 months later, I spoke to another friend. Then maybe 3 months later, I spoke to another friend. Then a month later, the frequency of disclosure was increasing, and I could just feel myself growing in confidence as I told my story. Every time I told it, I was coming to the table, and the vibe of how I was talking about it was like, I own that story now. That story doesn't own me anymore. And interestingly, the more I spoke about it, what was also happening was the fear of actually talking about it was reducing. So let's say the first time that I ever spoke to somebody when I was 27, I had to gear myself up for that. That took months and actually took quite a few attempts. Like I'd be in the pub with a mate and I'd be like, do it now, couldn't. I'd be around the mates just watching a film. I'd be like, do it now, couldn't. And then I finally did it. It wasn't like I just woke up one morning and I thought I would just do it. But then the second time, the third time, the fourth time, the fifth time I spoke, that fear, that build-up, that necessary build-up was all just dissolving away until I could just speak about it like I owned it. And that confidence and that strength through telling my story repeatedly, I just wanted to give others the opportunity to do that as well if they wanted to do so. So I launched this other platform alongside my own personal work called Something to Say. And for anybody that wants to check that out, you just type Something to Say official into any social media platform, you're going to find it. And what I decided to do was just to say, if anybody wants to share their story, you can submit it to us. Alongside that, as I worked with the designer that helps me with all the branding of my work, we also asked people to submit their photograph of their face, and we put a green bar across their mouth because that is the branding that we have, and that green bar represents a number of things which I won't get into now. I'll let people just go and judge that for themselves. And people started submitting, and for many people on there, it's the first time they've ever shared. And they can write their story down, they can rewrite their story. And this is a nice way for people to share their story, because actually to speak to somebody to their face, first of all, you need somebody that you can trust. And not everybody is fortunate enough to have that. And actually, it's tremendously scary to actually verbalize it like in speech. But here, at least, if you can write your story down, you can write it, have a look at it the next day, maybe leave it for a week, come back to it and maybe rewrite a few sections. So we just thought this was an incredible idea, and it's really turning into an incredible movement there. And what's being great now is we are not only getting people's stories being submitted, we're now actually attracted the attention of people, professionals within these circles. So we've had some therapists who, let's say, have been therapists for 20 or 30 years that have dealt with abuse victims. And they're actually starting to show the commonalities that they've seen to help us understand the trauma side of things. We had a neuroscientist write in. We had somebody who works with offenders write in. So like this Something to Say banner means so much, but it all comes back down to the basics of abuse prevention, because moving forward, we don't want this to happen to children anymore. So it's turning into a real community there. So I really encourage anybody that's listening to go check that out.
Yeah, it's amazing. I have had a look, obviously, and
Yeah.
seen it, and it's an incredible, powerful thing in the basis that an individual has not only shared their story but their photograph as well, and I think there's a lot to be said about asserting your own narrative,
Right.
about your lived experience.
There's something I'd also like to say on what you just mentioned,
Yeah.
and that is it's allowing people to control their narrative and organize the thoughts that they've got in their head about what happened in a strong manner. But something that I think is also incredible that comes from that is that they can then see, once their story is posted, the inspiration that they're giving others. So people press that like button, people press that comment button, they give their thoughts and they say thank you for either inspiring me or what incredible strength you've got. Like, it's a really encouraging environment. So it's not just that person setting their narrative straight, it's also actually helping others.
And I suppose it echoes your journey from something negative. You're creating these platforms where there's a ripple effect where people are able to do the same thing. When you've gone through this process where you then tell somebody in, and I'm using air quotes, in authority, what are some of the hurdles that somebody could come across? And for those people who are listening, who are in power, for them to recognise that they may need to be more sensitive.
I think you use a great word there, sensitive. Just be sensitive to somebody's disclosure, please. I would say some of the recommendations that I would give to somebody receiving a disclosure is the first thing to do is just listen. Just listen to what that person has to say. They have come to you because they're just about to tell you something that is going to be the most scary thing that they've ever told anyone before. This is going to be the scariest experience for them. So please just listen, give them space, hear them out. Don't panic, because you could be a professional hearing this, but you could also be a family member hearing this, and this is going to create a lot of emotion within you. But this isn't about you, right? This is about the person that's disclosing. You don't need to start investigating or asking more questions or trying to dig a bit deeper. Like, you may want to do that later when you engage and judge how the conversation is going to evolve, but that's not your place, right? You're not an investigator here. What that person needs is a space and a platform to talk to you about what happened. Of course, if the person is under 18, there's going to be work that needs to be done. If they are still in an abusive situation, we have a mandatory obligation in this country that I'm still learning about, by the way, so I don't know all the details, but you are obligated to report or encourage or take that young person through the reporting system to ensure that abusive situation comes to an end. But if it's an adult that's disclosing to you, just support them. You know, support them in wherever they need to go from that moment on.
And that's really important. So you're pointing out the fact is the first port of call is to just listen.
Because you are in a valuable spot, right? You are in the most incredible position if you are one of the early people that somebody's disclosing to. You have power and a responsibility in that position, because you are just about to either direct that person's experience of disclosing for the first time in a good direction or a poor one. And you will affect their lives forever. Because if you give them a poor response, that you didn't listen, you made it about you, you panicked, you questioned, you disbelieved, that person is never going to disclose again. You're going to hurt that person. So it's very important that we continue to get this correct.
If you do it badly, he's given this person another reason to not say anything.
Right.
And that is a double trauma, really,
Right.
I think. When within the work that I've done, working with in schools or other places, like you say, there's somebody under the age of 18, there is a level of them having to, they have a legal obligation to share this information or to do something about it. And one of the things, and I'd like your reflection on this, that understanding, okay, they're dealing with a child, so to speak, but this is an experience that is real and raw for this individual. Do you think it's more appropriate for them to talk about supporting this person about what could happen next, rather than just making it happen, like just signing the forms, just calling the police, just going through all these things and just ignoring the child? Is it important that we explain what position you're in, what you have to do, and what we have to stop happening?
Okay, I am really learning about this as we speak. I started speaking in schools earlier this year, and somebody asked me, what are you going to do if somebody comes to you who's a student after you've spoken and says they're actually in a similar position to what you were in and they just wanted to talk to you about it? Now, I hadn't actually thought about this too deeply at that time, but now I am definitely looking into it. And my latest knowledge is that what I must do when I go and speak into these schools is let the young person know that if they disclose to me, I am obligated to report it to a teacher. And the reason for that is because we want to support that young person in getting out of that abusive situation. We're here to help you. We're not here to scare you. We're actually also not going to push you into anything without informing you. We are adults that want to keep you safe. Now, that is the way it needs to be approached. And I do definitely have my issues with this situation, because I know that there will be at least 1 in 100 children that are going through an abusive situation. It could be in their family home. It could be from a parent's friend. It could be from somebody they're connected to, that will now not come forward with their abusive situation because they know that the adult who they tell is going to go off and report it immediately, when that's not actually what they want right now. They just want to talk to somebody first and report later. So there are complications around this obligation that we all have, but I think the obligation has to stand, because what we're trying to eliminate is adults hearing about sexual abuse situations that children are in and not acting on them. So that's what we're trying to get rid of with this mandatory obligation. I don't believe it's a law yet, but I do see some things on the news now where they're trying to make it a law. So when I go and speak in schools, one of the things that I attempt to leave the young people with is to feel inspired and empowered that if they do want to talk about it, that it's going to be okay. It's not going to be anything that they can't handle. And the safeguarding person who is going to deal with their situation is there to help them. And that's my latest. That's what I'm going with at the moment.
You said earlier about, it's not about the person who's being reported to. It's not their stuff. It's the person who's doing the reporting and listening to them. But sometimes as professionals can then take it upon themselves for their own personal triggers, their own political viewpoints, and think, right, I must do something about it, and then start doing to the person reporting rather than walking alongside them and shielding them from any further abuse.
Right. Because that young person that's coming to speak with you, I'm going to guess in most cases, are not asking for the police to be knocking on their door the next day, asking for a statement. That's not what they're looking for, right? They're just looking for somebody to confide in and find out what the steps are after this. So I believe the safeguarding circles do very well with these situations. I believe, for sure, things have developed hugely since I was at school. That's no doubt about it. And just let's just take a very simple example. There are designated safeguarding leads that children can go to. And when I ask a couple of times that I have done this in schools. Does everybody know where they can go and who their safeguarding lead is in the school? Everybody puts their hand up. I don't believe we had safeguarding leads when we were at school. I don't think that was a thing. So I believe it's changed. I believe there's reason to be optimistic, but not overly optimistic, because the crime's still happening.
What I'd like people to do is to remember that safeguarding is to safeguard the person who's being in pain or in trauma. It's not about rescuing them. You can't stop what's happened. You can just prevent any further trauma.
Right.
But it's how you do that is with the person. That's regardless of their age, there needs to be advocacy rather than and giving them agency rather than just doing it to them. Which yes. I think that's a little bit of a rant for me. No. I absolutely agree, and it's useful information. It's really useful information, because the more I learn about this, I understand. I'm figuring out and developing ways of continually making the young person feel empowered through the whole situation, because that's going to remove their nerves, that's going to remove their anxiety, and they will then come to us with the situation. So, I mean, all information is so useful. And now you started a podcast as well.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So I've been making YouTube videos for quite a while now, and I'd say 3 main types of YouTube video. The first one is if I come across a really striking video online that talks about any type of area of this topic. It could be actually from a snippet from the news, the latest thing that's going on. It could be something about an educational video about trauma. It could be a short movie that I've come across that I think is really good. I do a reaction of that particular video. So I play the video in the corner of the screen and I stop it at certain points and I do some commentary. That's the first one, that type of video that I do. The second is if I've got a topic on my mind that I just want to talk about, I just sit in front of the camera and I just talk about it. And so that's the second one that I do. The most recent video that I released was I just talked about the whole Dalai Lama situation and the video that was going around about that and both sides of that discussion, which was very, very interesting. And the third type of video that I do was Zoom calls, interviewing people, bringing them onto my platform. And I'm generally interviewing experts that can help us understand these topics in better detail. So 3 types of video. And what I decided to do was I know that some people don't use YouTube. Some people don't want to watch a video of those types of things. So I just extracted the audio and posting it on podcast format so people can actually listen to these things. So I'm actually trying to build a structure where you can come in at any door that you want, right? So you can come into the Something to Say movement, because you enjoy hearing, you get inspiration from reading people's stories. You can come into my platform, Jeremy Indica, where I talk about my journey continuing as I evolve this work and learn more. You can come in on the podcast now. You can come in on the YouTube channel. You can come in like that. I just want to create so many doors for you to come into the circle in whatever form that you want and go as deep as you want. Because, everybody likes things at different levels and different types of content, different quality pieces of content. And that's really what I'm trying to bring to the table.
So it's almost like you are opening up every possible avenue, apart from somebody knocking on your door, to basically get some information and support. It's almost just by the accessibility creates this normalcy. Like, well, of course you can talk about it because you can just send something on the internet, you can send an email, or of course you can talk about it because somebody's already said this on a podcast, or you saw it's on YouTube. It's because it's there, it's reinforcing the fact that this happens, it's real, these are real people, this has happened to, we need to do something about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Accessibility is a great word to use. I like that, and I've never really thought about that word yet. I want to make this subject, this discussion, conversation, accessible on any of the level that you want it on, any platform you want it on, any platform that you use, you can use that to engage with the whole movement. And as you finished with there, the conversation about what we're going to do about all of this. And that is my main driver. What are we actually going to do about all of this? Because we can keep talking about things when they've happened, and that's okay and necessary. But what we're trying to do is not create any more victims anymore. We don't want victims anymore. We want the Something to Say page to never have a story submitted to it again, right? We want victim support to not be needed. That's what we're aiming for. So it is, how are we going to move forward with this conversation? Because the conversation is archaic at the moment. It's in the Stone Ages. That's what I believe. I mean, we can't even talk about it.
Yeah.
You know, I can't get on any of the major platforms. I really can't. Right, I've nearly got there with the BBC. I've nearly got there with ITV Breakfast Show. I've nearly got there with a couple of big publications. It always falls over at the last hurdle because we don't even know how to talk about it. We don't even. It's so horrific. We can't even have it on our mainstream media. Now I know that's changing massively. I had some evidence that that's changing massively because one of the stories that really inspired me before I kicked all of this off was I read a story as I started doing more research on this topic online. I read a story from an 80-year-old woman, and she said that she had never spoken her story out loud because she comes from an era where you couldn't even do that if you wanted to. You don't talk about child sexual abuse in the 60s, the 70s, right? Now it's very, very much different. We have films propping up that start suggesting about narratives about it. We have documentaries on it. We have, people are starting to report on it. I do believe it's changing, but still it's way behind the times. In comparison to, if you think about how often this crime is happening, I mean, that would scare you. If we could get real statistics, that would scare everybody. But in comparison to how the predictions of how much is happening, the discussion around it is minimal.
I spoke to a colleague of mine who has a lived experience as a young man of running around with a group of 15 friends, quite feral, going to places we shouldn't be doing, and climbing things we shouldn't. And even within our group, we knew there were some adults that were not okay, but we didn't say anything. And I look back now and I'm thinking to myself, where are these children now? Where is this person? Why don't we say, well, that's not okay, we should tell someone? And I think that's the thing, that we don't have this understanding that we must assert the protection of our fellow human beings. And I think your work has increased the opportunities for people to just say, hold on a moment, that's not okay.
And I think maybe young teenagers today are more assertive with these subjects because it's brought to their education system now. Abuse is taught, abuse, the subject of abuse or the situations of abuse awareness is a conversation in schools. So I believe teenagers are a lot more prepared to notice something that isn't correct in their environment. But it shouldn't be up to teenagers to be calling this out. It's up to us adults to protect them. And we still can't have the conversation about people who are committing this crime. I released a podcast where I interviewed a woman from America who has spent 25 years working with offenders that were released from prison, monitoring them, supervising them, ensuring that they don't break the terms of their release, and evaluating their risk to society and ensuring that they never reoffend. And for me, that is a important discussion for us to have, because the fact is people do finish their prison sentence. They do serve their prison sentence. No one's getting life for this crime. Nobody gets life for sexually abusing a child, exploiting them for their body. Nobody gets life. They get short sentences. So they are released back into the community at some point. How are we going to ensure they don't reoffend? We can't even have that conversation. Because when I release a podcast like that, people are so angry, rightly so, right? This is hugely emotive. We are so angry, we can't even have a talk, we can't even have a discussion about it. And the most common response I get when I release a podcast like that is just kill them. Just lock them up forever and throw away the key. That is not useful. That's not useful, because the death sentence is not something that's handed out as a punishment in this country. And unless you're going to go out there and campaign about it yourself, then just saying it is not helping. Also, as I mentioned, life is not given for a crime like this. Life in prison is not given. So whilst those laws are not available to us, what are we going to do? What are we going to do to stop people from reoffending? We need to have the conversation, because otherwise people will keep coming out of prison and reoffending. That was a very interesting podcast, but I just wanted to bring it to the table that we're still so angry, we still can't have the conversation, and that is only going to hurt more children.
And so it's always you think about a journey where, somebody's reported something that's happened, and then when we talk about somebody who's behaved in this way that's hurt somebody like that, we almost have to have a conversation about the whole of the timeline. And the timeline is that somebody, regardless of what their makeup is or however it is, they've decided that this is the appropriate way to treat a child.
Yeah, because if we, as you say, look at the timeline of that person, right? So let's say somebody molests an underage child. There is a life there of the offender. What led up to them deciding that that was what they were going to do? And was there any opportunity for us to intervene before that crime happened? Because we are very happy to get involved when the crime has been committed. But we're late. Where were we in all the stages before that happened? Now, I've seen some interventions in suggestions of how that can happen. I know that there is a charity in this country, here in England, called Stop It Now. And I've actually interviewed the director of that charity on my podcast. Now, they have opened an anonymous phone line for anybody to come forward if they're worried about what they've got in their head and that it could potentially get out of control and lead to them committing crime. In 2021, when they opened their phone line, they got 7,000 calls from people who are worried about what they're watching online and that they're worried that it's getting out of control and they may commit an offence and they may go out there to actually groom a child. 7,000. You can't believe it. And if you think about that number, what's the ratio going to be? 7,000 people actually called the phone line. How many didn't? And that's a UK service, right? So it's like, how are we going to get to these people and get them to change their mind on committing the crime? Because that's where we need to be at. That's true prevention. But we can't have the conversation about what we're going to do with offenders once they're released from prison. How the hell are we going to have the conversation about people who potentially will offend? Because again, it's just the words of they're just pure evil, just kill them. Well, how can you kill somebody that's never committed a crime? Even if we had the death sentence, you can't kill someone for thoughts, So it's a big and complicated conversation. It's a big and complicated conversation that I hope in my lifetime we will see us start to have. Because it's a cultural change, and we need to put our anger to the side to be able to do that. We really do. I think it's interesting if I try to turn this on its head and say to anybody that's suffered abuse in their childhood, if there were some kind of intervention measures or support system of some sort or processes and procedures developed to get to these people before they commit the crime, that's something that people are angry at. However, if that was available and the person that abused you had that available to them and possibly seeked that professional interaction that would have led them, just even if it brought them 1% closer to leaving you alone, you would have wanted that to happen.
Yeah.
And that makes complete sense. That just makes logical sense then, if I try to frame it like that. But I hope we can start to have the conversation about it. And I think that statistic that I got from that charity is so staggering and really highlights that, yeah, we're looking for prevention here, not reaction, right? So I think it's a big conversation. Otherwise, it's going to continue happening.
And you're going into schools as well. Is there any sort of geographic limit as to where you go in regards to schools?
So I have opened it up to anybody in England, and I would travel further, but obviously then there's travel costs to be included, and then it becomes a costly exercise. But I have opened it to everybody in England, and I am encouraging schools to bring me in. I'm encouraging schools to not be afraid and to not be hesitant and not worry, because I'm not coming in to teach the children anything that may be thought of as not appropriate in their curriculum or whatever that may be. I'm just coming and telling a real life story, and that should be enough. I'm just a guy with a real life story, and I'm happy to tell it. Let me just come and tell the story to the young people, right? And just round them up and just say, there's nothing to fear. It's all good. We do a little bit of safeguarding talk towards the end about potential options if they want to speak to somebody, and then I leave. And do you know what? I've spoken to a number of schools now, and it's never the case. It's always the case that when I open my Instagram the next day, there's always one or two students that have messaged me to say, thank you so much for that yesterday. That was so engaging. That was so powerful. That's left me with so much to think about. And I've even had students say, in PSHE, it's so boring when they talk about that. Not the teacher's fault, by the way. That's just the school system, right? They're like, oh, you just made it so interesting. And then I know that the job's done.
And understanding how it kind of works, that seed that's been put into their brain,
okay,
that they then start sharing with other people, and those other people feel a little bit stronger to share their story as well. So it's very powerful. Yeah. And
every time that I've spoken in the school, I've left and they've all posted. They always post about it on their own social media, which is enough backing to know that it went well. And I've even had one of the teachers say, we were so worried about how that would go, but it was just phenomenal. So I don't need more barriers from schools.
Yeah.
I have enough barriers on my plate. Like, I don't need more barriers from school. Let's just get this subject in front of the young people. It's enough. They watch films, they watch TV dramas. I'm just doing it in a live environment, right? And that should be enough. So how do you sustain it? You're one human being. Sustainability emotionally, but also sustainability to actually be able to do this work. Okay, so I'm working too much at the moment. But I'm building something. I'm at the first levels. I'm on like level 1 and level 2, I feel like. So I am working too much. I don't want to work this much. It's constantly on my mind. That's not good, and it's not actually going to help me be innovative and creative. I need to step away from it, but at the moment I don't. That's not my long-term plan. I'm just trying to get everything up and running. Now, I mentioned that I had an engineering career. So when I actually left that engineering career, I had very, very good savings, life savings that I collected from that engineering career. So I used that to build the project. And then as that started to run out, I started looking for ways to generate funds, and I've managed to actually get some things running. First of all, I get paid for speaking events, in particular the conferences that I do, speaking in businesses and organizations. They pay me well. So that's one great thing coming in. I also receive donations through my website, jeremyindica.com. People are following and supporting the work. I'm very pleased about that. I also sell merchandise, hoodies and t-shirts with some slogans on my website. So I'm managing to bring in some income, and I'm just keeping my head above water. So that's now sorted. I feel very proud about that, by the way, because when I was in like year 3, and I'd run out of money completely, I was like, how am I going to continue this? And I've managed to turn that around. So I'm really pleased about that. Now, emotionally and in regards to mental health, dealing with this topic every day and the constant strive for it, coming up across barriers all the time, and that's tough. That's tough, but I wouldn't change it. I wake up very motivated every morning to make the next steps, to evolve the next piece of work, to try to grow this, to try to contact this person. So it's all good, and yet it's not all. It's not all happy. It's not like this is a happy subject to deal with every day, but that doesn't matter. Like the purpose of it overpowers the fact that it can get sad at times.
Is there anything that you reserve for yourself, 5 minutes a day, or a song or something to kind of keep you yourself?
So I spend the time that I'm not working with friends and family. I make sure that I stay healthy. I do a little exercise now and again. I keep that an exercise routine, and I stick to it. I do a little meditation. I read a book now and again, and so I do take myself away from it whenever I can. It's just this year has been a bit crazy, but like I went and saw friends, watched the football yesterday, and that was a great time. So I do have to come out of it. And so I take care of myself the best I can. But the vision for the future is to build a team of people. I actually do have 2 volunteers and somebody who helps me out like for 5 hours a week, and I pay her. She's phenomenal. And so I do have a mini team that I'm building to help me with all the tasks. My goal moving into the future is to build a team of people that help me run all of these different things, and then I don't have to do all of the tasks myself, and that's the goal.
And are there any key gaps that you need somebody to fill?
Love that question. Yes, please let me talk about them. So I am looking for a podcast producer that can handle the podcasting, editing, posting, writing the promotion post for it, because at the moment I'm doing all of that. Somebody can do that, right? Somebody can do that task, and they can own that task. The running of the clothing label, somebody can own that task, and we can turn it into something monetary. We can monetize it, and then we can start paying people to help me with those tasks. Video editing for my YouTube channel, I don't need to be posting on my YouTube channel. Right, I need somebody that loves editing, loves creating the thumbnails, gets really excited about all of that, writing the description, making sure it's SEO format. Like, I just want to bring people in the team to handle those things. But it's step by step. Step by step, because I don't have the money to pay somebody right now. So it would be on a voluntary basis until we get that part monetized. So it's all just step by step. I know that.
I really appreciate you coming on today to talk and sharing, the multitude of work that you're doing at the moment. So
I appreciate it. I enjoyed the conversation a lot, and let's do it again soon.
So I've just finished editing. This podcast episode with Jeremy. And I've had to go out for a bit of a walk because he's doing so much. And it's just one individual. So I implore you, if you have any time at all, donate to him, buy a t-shirt, listen to his podcast, which I'm going to put in the show notes now, because he has that going on, and it's really, really informative. If you have any experience of childhood trauma or childhood sexual exploitation, anything like that kind of rings true with you, get in touch with him or some of the organisations that are in the show notes. He's doing so much, he deserves your support. If you could, as I say, donate. But I would also say, if you're a teacher, if you run a business or anything where you feel that this might be necessary, and I doubt very much it would not be necessary for him to come in and speak about his experience and what you can do if you are also a victim, or if you know somebody's a victim, or if you need to be able to support somebody who's a victim of this, then definitely get in touch with him. All of the details are in the show notes. It's taken me too long to get this episode out. I'm glad I did, and I hope it's useful. I'm not going to say enjoyable, but I hope it's useful. I hope it empowers you to support someone or to seek support. That's it really, but please get involved and let's see if we can put a stop to this sort of thing. Moving on, I did an episode a while ago on consent. I'm going to redo that, and there'll be something quite exciting about that afterwards. So stay tuned to other episodes of the 187 Said podcast. I'm 187. Thank you very much. Take care. Thank you for listening to this episode, and wherever you listen to this podcast, please subscribe, like, or leave a comment.